I failing. So welcome everyone. Welcome to another new year, 2026. A lot of big exciting events this year. As many people have probably seen, Trans Rockies has kind of come out with a bunch of new cool events, both here in Canada and across the border. You're noticing a trend of a little bit shorter stage races. I think a little bit more able for people to sink their teeth into in terms of getting the actual time off work to do them and whatnot. So some cool events both on mountain bike and gravel. So again, thanks everyone for coming on. It'd be great, like if you write in the chat, like gives me a bit of a reference point of like what events are you doing this year? Because this is kind of a pretty broad topic, and we'll have people from lots of different avenues of which I coach. Obviously, my background was in triathlon and off-road triathlon, and then kind of raced that professionally for quite a chunk, about 10 years. Then moved into during the pandemic into just racing bikes. So doing things like BC Bike Race, Trans Rockies, and whatnot, kind of racing within Canada. So yeah, just as kind of things go, just let me know what your plan is. Because obviously, again, it applies to life, it applies to racing, it applies to multi facets of life. So again, what were we talking about today? Goal setting, utilization of cross training. So these are the kind of the avenues, things that we're talking about. So goal setting, mental rehearsal, sports training, relaxation, cross training, and how to apply it into the current program. And then, of course, questions. Um, as things go, like feel free to just ask questions along the way. We're not crazy numbers on this call. A lot of it gets recorded. Well, this gets recorded and we post it on YouTube for people that aren't able to make this time. Um, but yeah, like ask your questions, just unmute and speak up, and we can pause. Like there's no stress. Um, so yeah, lot of oops, sorry, gotta go back one. A lot of good races and stuff that people are doing, which is awesome to see. So we'll start with goal setting. I think this is kind of the real like first step along the way. Obviously, I'm a big advocate for your goal setting to not be January 1. Um, Ideally, we want to be setting our goals, kind of in that November, even October, with a lot of these races that we typically saw kind of middle of the summer creeping up into the front part of the calendar. We kind of got to start thinking through what we want a little bit sooner. And obviously, there's many reasons why these races have kind of moved up more forward. We're noticing higher temperatures and heat as it brings on forest fires. So that's where I think that's a trend we're gonna see more is just racing in the front part of the calendar and the back part of the calendar. And you're gonna start seeing like the whole idea of racing through July and August start to be probably a thing of the past as races are kind of not able to take that chance. So nonetheless, goals, we need to set them sooner because our racing starts sooner. And ultimately, like if we're racing end of May, early June, you kind of got to get after it starting a lot sooner like that again, kind of October, November, after having a break. Like if you did race late into the year, that's no problem. If you need, like, again, you need downtime, you need recovery, So maybe you are starting a little bit on the later side, but again, you would have carried more fitness if you race later into the year. So no stress either way. But again, there's kind of two types of goals. Um, Two very distinctly different. Both have important point. One being process-based goals, and the other being outcome-based goal. So an outcome-based goal is pretty simple. Everyone knows what that is. It's I want to win the race. That's an outcome-based goal. So simple, easy. Maybe it's you want to win your age group. Maybe it's I want to be in the top 50 people of the race. These are all, kind of ideas of outcome-based goals. So where outcome-based goals, kind of generally, it's some benchmark, it's something that we can put down that's tangible, that we can see it. We see it on a results page. We can show our friends, those kind of things. And sometimes even again, the goal can just be to just finish the thing, get the medal, the belt buckle, whatever it might be for whatever race you're doing. Maybe it's a time that you need to hit. So where these things can become problematic in terms of the outcome-based goals, and speaking from having a professional career where my goal was to win Xterra World Championships and the other goal was to go to the Olympics for triathlon, both of which in those outcome-based were failed. The closest I ever got to Worlds was seventh. At the Elite Worlds, and that I did, I think, three or four times I came seventh in the top 10, which is really good looking back, but it wasn't the outcome that I wanted. And same with the Olympics. Never made it to the Olympics, got close, got shortlisted a few times, but ultimately never went. So we can see why these can be problematic in that if I was to look at my career, those are my two kind of overarching big goals. And ultimately they were failed. But I don't, as I sit here today as a retired professional athlete, I don't look at my career at all as a failure. I look at my career with quite a bit of happiness and fulfillment, because there's all these other things that happened along the way, all these other races I won, times that you might have beaten an ex-world champion or whatever. So there's lots of these things along the way that I was getting good feedback, which segues me into process-based goals. And this is why, again, I'm sitting here not feeling like a failure in my racing careers because I had process goals. And so what do those look like? Those can be as minute and small as I want to start going to bed, most nights at around 8:39, or I want to make my training be as good as possible in terms of, I want to be consistent and it's a broader view of the whole thing. So, I think again, I'll go back to my own career where I got to train with the best athletes in the world for what I did. I got to travel the world, and ultimately, for really 5 of my 10 years racing professionally, I was giving everything I had to those goals. So, process wise, I showed up at World Champs knowing that I dedicated myself fully. So when I missed that goal and I had a good race, I executed, and there was just, 6 other guys that were better than me on that day, and I know what I did to go into it, I'm not feeling like a failure when I walk away from that event because process wise, I did everything I could. I stayed healthy. I did my training. I ate well. I, took care of my mental health and I showed up ready to compete and it went well. I've had other races where, where there wasn't that process goal met. Troubles in personal life, troubles with, training, like injuries, illnesses, and you show up at the race and you do question and doubt yourself, process wise, did I reach my goals? So, is that making sense in terms of outcome, process, the division of the two, and the importance of why we have both? Okay, sweet. So, the main point to this is, you know, have both these goals because you might say, I want to be in the top 50 of the race, but maybe it's a year where all of a sudden, like 10 or 15 retired professional athletes decide to do the event as an amateur. And all of a sudden, you're like, oh, I wanted to be in the top 50. Say you come 60th, but you're like looking at these names and you're like, what? Like that person used to race pro, this person used to do this and whatnot. Like you're gonna be a bit more like, well, I didn't hit that specific goal, but did you perform well? And did you rest well going into the event? Like that's where you kind of go back and look at both. So I implore everyone to make sure they're looking kind of at both sides of this. Have your outcome goals, also have your process goals, and develop them with your coach, and whatnot. So I'll leave that there for goal setting. If anyone else has any questions, happy to kind of have any. If anyone wants to share any of their goals, because I guess before I actually leave this, you can't just kind of think them in your head. You gotta actually write them down. I gotta make sure I'm actually looking at my notes here. So write them down, make sure that they become real and start talking about them because the more you talk about them, the more real they become. And they
And
don't just become something that's quietly in your own head that you don't share with anybody. So tell your coach, write it down, and take action every day to the process of those. Scott, you have your hand up.
yeah, just saying, wanted to say that was one of the best piece of advice that you've given me is because when we first worked together, I was like, no, I want to be this position or whatever. And I've totally stopped thinking about that. It's just more about sticking on the process and then um, you know, having, writing out what I want to race for the next year and, how are we going to structure my training program for that? I mean, that's awesome. So thank you for that. It's very, very helpful.
Yeah, no, awesome. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah.
Sweet. We'll go into the next bit here. Mental rehearsal. So, this is kind of a bit long-winded, but mental, and we'll kind of be pinning back and forth on this topic and whatnot, but we are in indoor training season for most people, I'm going to guess on this call. I imagine maybe I've got some people south of the border with Trans Rockies having events in Arizona and whatnot. Maybe you guys are enjoying lovely, mid 70s temperatures. I used to actually live in Arizona for half the year when I was kind of through that training full time for triathlon. So where is this helpful? This is helpful in so many different aspects of now we have our goals and we've written them down. Mental rehearsal is like you starting to take those goals and put them in your head. So when you're doing this trainer workout that your awful coach has prescribed and you're cursing him, because it's maybe 3 by 10 minutes at threshold and it's just a monster of a workout, like arguably say, it's easy to kind of drift off and focus about how much it sucks and how much it hurts. But we can take ourselves back and put ourselves in the moment of you're doing the interval, and now you start in your head porting yourself to the race and thinking about, this is me at, whatever climb at whatever race, and I'm in the middle of the race, and um, that's me accomplishing this well. Like I need to hit this wattage number. And it's like you're visualizing, like I'm staying ahead of the guy that's in my age group and I'm trying to put him on the rivet to break him. Um, that's the kind of stuff we're talking about with mental rehearsal here. So the more that we can take our goals, outcome, process, apply them into our actual training, it really starts to build and adds more depth and layer to what we're actually accomplishing. In terms of, everyone knows that there's a portion of being an athlete that's physical, but there's the larger portion that's mental. And again, this is something that in my last 5 years of racing, I really understood a lot better than the first kind of 5 years. I understood that like what you tell your mind and what you do in your training, incorporating that mindfulness, um, really does translate into results. To the point of like how I viewed it was I could become just this perfect little robot that, bad things could happen within my race, but I was so mentally switched on and I thought of so many different scenarios within my training and brought it back to racing that, I could overcome things that hadn't yet happened to me because I'd already thought them through. And you'll see that, when you're watching, say, the Tour de France and you're watching like epic comebacks of guys that, punctured, were out the back and they're riding back up through the race. It's because there's a day in their training where they decided that that's how they were mentally going to kind of prepare for that. Um, and ultimately, like, limitations, your coach is going to pull his hair out if on your easy ride, you decide to have this like moment of, I'm going to solo off the front and mentally like draw it into my race when you're meant to be zone one. Like, have the applicable times that you do it. Like on your zone one easy rides, personally, I think it's a good time to reflect about, where are you within, kind of smaller aspects of your life? Like, are you eating well? Are your relationships in your life solid and good? Are you, um, eating and sleeping? So, kind of again, like trying to think about what zone you're going to do what in. Again, for another example, like if the workout is a VO2 max, a lot of those you should consider like this is my fighting to the line to win my age group or fighting to make a time cutoff, whatever. It's like the max effort, it's all you've got. If we're talking about, say, tempo or zone three, we might think of like, oh, okay, I'm going to try and pick a part of the middle of the race, a nice controlled effort where I'm just trying to wear down my competition, but not wear myself out. So again, trying to like put these thoughts into your training based on what your training actually is prescribed. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. And again, we're kind of still in the same place, but talking about the visualization of other parts within the race. So kind of touched on it again of like the execution of effort, but what about now the technical component? And so, there's lots of other parts to the race that can provide anxiety and be kind of stressful situations. Big, gnarly tech sections are one that usually has a lot of people feeling a lot of apprehension. Um, and another one is the start of a race.
My coach has a training
So,
series.
um, so basically, with those, we can start visualizing those things and trying to take the opportunities of like, you're looking at a tech section in your training, and again, that idea of like walking the line, getting off your bike and just looking at it, look at it from different angles. And then visualize yourself like, do I visualize and see myself doing this? This is a big predictor for me if I'm going to ride something super tech or not. Especially living in like Whistler, Pemberton way, like we have stuff built here that is like pro of the pro level. Like it's you do have to govern yourself. And there's lots of stuff that I see that I'm like, I will never build up to ride that line. It was made for a movie and no one's ever ridden it since. Like, you can look at it and it's like, I can't visualize myself doing it. I'm not doing it. So in tech stuff, that's what I'm talking about. If you can see yourself doing it and you spend some time to look at it, maybe it's worth trying it. If you don't see yourself doing it in a successful mind, don't do it. Kind of comes back to like, self-preservation during racing of like sometimes it's better just to get off your bike and run through a section or, kind of have that mental awareness before you get to it. I'd say the one thing I notice a lot, the last few years that I've not really been racing myself, I've been more at the events kind of at a coaching capacity, and I've watched athletes, is I really watch a level of situational awareness just evaporate. And people make really bad decisions because they're in this go, 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 go mindset because it's a race. But the race is, yes, there's a race, but the more that you can back out and kind of have more situational awareness. So, again, things like, I know I don't want to ride that section. I'm going to plan to get off my bike and run through that component. Like that's what I'm talking about, situational awareness. As well as like someone passes you going at a pace that is unsustainable for you. Situational awareness is you sitting and going, I can't ride that pace because I have training, I know what my, threshold heart rate is or my functional threshold power. Like I know these things, so I know that I need to back off or I'm going to blow up. And as well, situational awareness is digesting and eating while you're on the bike. So these are things that people just like, they get so focused on the race because all through their training, they trained, but they never applied racing into their training. So that is same for, again, as we talk about, nutrition is a massive component of our racing. Um, if you never like in your training went and kind of had to keep the mental fortitude of like, I need to remember to eat and drink, then why would it show up all of a sudden on race day? So again, these are things that we want to be putting in into our racing and whatnot. So um does that kind of make sense? Is like kind of this drawing um, mental into like kind of our nuts and bolts training. Okay, sweet. And again, if you have questions, please unmute and or just type it in chat too. So relaxation. This is my dog Milo. And this dude knows how to play hard and then recover hard and relax. So on one end, we're trying to talk about while you're training to really switch on mentally and kind of bring up big emotional thoughts while you're training. So again, like this idea of like seeing the success that you want while training. They're obviously very big, stimulating, both physically, mentally. But the main thing now is, the training's done and we're off the bike and it's time now to like kind of like reset the nervous system from, you're in this big fight or flight, like big session, um, to now needing to like go into our rest and digest. So the sooner we can kind of re-regulate ourselves, and obviously there's a plethora of resource here in terms of things like breath work, you can do meditation with some of the apps that exist. And other things like maybe just having a very light stretch with some food that you like. Um, the main thing is like just try to have some time throughout the day that you're like, unplugged from the phones. Reading a book is a great one. For me, honestly, like I just find, running a coaching company, it's very busy. I'm kind of constantly on the computer. So just having like 10 minutes of just complete, like, sterile, no cell, no computer, no TV, like just lay and kind of reset. That sometimes really helps me, especially again after a big session that was like very like hard. Um, the better we can get into this state, the bigger gains and the more we'll absorb from that session. So again, recovery, you're hearing a lot of things of like you train, recover, using mental awareness, like all these different components. And that's really what we're trying to do. We're trying to train at a higher level than just the rudimentary bike for this to this hard at this duration. Like we're trying to make it more than that. And in turn, when we're done, we're trying to also maximize the recovery component. So that's what I'm meaning with relaxation. Anyone got any questions on there? Okay. Now, back to again something that's very for this time of year, cross training. What is it? Why would I bother? And how do I add it within my program? So first things first, like through my racing career, I hated and still hate the trainer, like just with a passion. There was a certain level of I had to do a certain amount of it that was just non-negotiable. But when I say, for example, would have to do a long ride, there was no way in hell I was going to ride 3 to 4 hours on a trainer. That's a picture of me ski touring off the side of Blackcomb, Whistler Blackcomb. I would go ski touring. That was my cross training thing in the winter that really helped me. Um, so for me, that was a big piece of my winter training. You're wearing a heavy pack, there's a functional strength component, had similar heart rate profiles of when I went out for long rides. So it wasn't like I just arrived at that this was going to be what I would do. There was some like, oh, okay, I'll wear a watch when I go ski tour with a heart rate, see what I get values wise. And to me, it was like an amazing tool. And ultimately, I'd show up to camp sometimes fitter than if I just did trainer. Because one, back to this whole mental side of things, I was happier. So again, you're going to perform if you're happy. So get back to this like mentally being on top of things. But again, it's not just ski touring because that's not attainable for everyone. So what are other forms of cross training? Well, maybe it's going hiking if you're, say, living out in the desert with, again, a pack filled with all your favorite snacks and things. Maybe you add a little weight in there if you're feeling extra spicy. But that's an example. Say if you're a road cyclist and only a road cyclist, well, cross training would be taking up mountain biking. So where we see cross training a lot more is in the running side of our world. A lot of professional runners bike and they bike a lot because what they realized is in a run program, a lot of bodies start breaking down at around the 100-mile mark. And this is professional runners I'm talking about. A lot of them can't run 100 miles, or after 100 miles, they start having soft tissue problems come up. So basically, the important thing there is they would use bikes to be able to continually build their aerobic capacity without putting more load on their soft tissue and especially specific sport specific. So again, like, you know, snowshoeing, great. I just had a question in the chat. Ski touring and Nordic are pretty clear cross training ops. Do you think there's value in straight alpine skiing? Yeah. Straight alpine skiing is a good one. In terms of, I've always had a hard time quantifying it personally because for whatever reason, I am absolutely wrecked when I've done a full day of it, but not cardiovascularly. There's a level of mental um, load as you're skiing and you're making all these decisions And then you're riding the chair resting, but there's a strength component. I'd call it like there's definitely more of like a strength and conditioning benefit, um, less of a cardiovascular one. Now, again, if you're like boot packing up stuff, then the cardiovascular thing goes up. But yeah, I would say, you want to do something that's kind of elevating the heart rate a little bit more. So it's something that you can just watch if you're skiing and you're skiing long durations and you're getting like, 120 beats a minute, 130, then check mark. But for me, when I ski downhill, I don't get that high a heart rate. I simmer at like this really low zone one. So I have to do a lot of it to really feel it. So good question. Oops, good question for sure. Um, but yeah, so coming back to it, I mean, again, mentally trying to keep yourself fresh. Because again, if all I did was ride a bike, and I think this is kind of why I did so well with triathlon, is because you had three sports to play around within. When I switched to just bike racing, I still like my biggest bike weeks, like I tried to do like, 16 hours on the bike only, and then strength and conditioning and layered in some other stuff. But really, my happy place was about 12 hours in a bike saddle a week. And I then complemented it with swimming and running, and strength and conditioning. And that's then when I found I was happiest, versus just riding and only riding. But again, there's some caveats to that in terms of when you do this. So cross training, generally speaking, is in our very early stages of our training programs. Ideally, like, say for example, if I was racing, I wouldn't, all of a sudden be like, yeah, I'm gonna go and do this big like ski tour trip thing where I'm doing a lot of ski touring day after day if I'm like 3 weeks out from a race. So again, it's kind of things to think about. You need a little bit more specificness to your training if you're about to race. But again, when racing is, way more in the future, you got time to do some cross training. Um, so yeah. Any questions on cross training or any kind of activities that you're curious about? There's obviously lots that I probably haven't even touched on yet. So,
You mind if I ask a question, Carson?
yeah, please go ahead.
So, we haven't really incorporated running in my program, and you know, if I haven't done it for a while, I definitely feel it after a run. Is that something like we should be thinking about, and like how do we transition into being able to handle a run without being wrecked?
Yeah. Running is one that when I have bikers and only bikers where they've never run in their life, um, I've never really gone to adding that in. I'd rather see someone more like go hike or whatnot. Not to say that you can't, it's just there's a real long progression that you need to do that's very slow and tedious. And if you don't actually have the goal of doing any running events, the juice might not be worth the squeeze, so to speak. But not to say it can't get done. I always remember this conversation, where one of the guys I raced with was Jeff Kabush, and we were chatting because his sister actually did the kind of racing that I did, and so he was well aware of, like multi-sport or whatever, but he always more bike raced. I think he did one off-road try once. Um, but generally speaking, for him, like he always used to have this thing about running where he's like, I just run enough that I can run for an hour in my off season and then I'm okay. Like he's not, like you're talking about super like wrecked, soft tissue wise. So, again, that doesn't take a lot to like keep that going. But the caveat to running and cycling especially is you want to avoid running like 2, 3 weeks from any major competition because it zaps your top end power on a bike. And this is what triathletes are consistently balancing. Whereas if you're just a single sport athlete, like I've got multi-sport athletes that now only bike race. Who's one of my athletes is pro woman in bike racing and was a pro woman in triathlon. So we keep running in the early part of her program, and if she gets a race event that she wants to do this trail running event like early season, we keep it. But as we flow into our actual race season, we toss running. Um, Unless again it's through like, oh, you got some downtime, we don't have races close, we'll add some running in because that's what you feel like doing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thanks, dude.
Sweet. Strength and conditioning. So this is kind of a longer topic. And again, this is a rabbit hole that you can go deep, deep down. Um, so, when should you start it? Like now. And I mean, ideally, you would have done a bunch in the fall. But if you haven't, start it. Um, and then in terms of the like, this is probably the biggest thing I've always heard along the way. And obviously things have changed a lot, even from the beginning of my pro career to the end. Like strength and conditioning was kind of like, oh, you're gonna get too big, you're gonna build too much muscle. It's just not true. You're doing way too much endurance training that it's just not possible to kind of build that kind of muscle while you're doing that much endurance. The thing is what the goal that we're trying to do here is create a very functionally strong person. Now, you know, this idea of when you should start, obviously, again, I said soon as possible. When should you stop it? I personally always stopped as I got closer to my race season. Kind of about 2 weeks out from my race season, I would stop and go into a maintenance program where I more did the movements to keep my body moving, but I wasn't really lifting weight anymore because I found it zapped my top end too much. And again, there's some people who will stay in a very involved strength and conditioning program right throughout their whole race season. Personally, I always elected to really dial it back. And then, so for clients that I have who are not racing professionally, like a lot of times I just pull it with, again, the idea of like, you're going to do these things that you've learned in your strength and conditioning in terms of stretching or the dynamic warm-up components that you use as you get to the race. So your body stays moving, so you're not getting really tight and stiff and not flexible without, again, trying to overwork. Because again, as we get into the middle of the summer, we are starting to do like zone 4 and zone 5, and we're doing lots of it. We're racing, we're trying to recover. It just starts to become hectic. So that's the thing, is you build your foundation in the fall and early winter. That's the big fat brick at the bottom that you build upon. And when you're in that zone 4, 5, really pointy end of the zones and of the top of your fitness, you can't be kind of building big bricks there, or you'd fall over, so to speak, if I make it visual. Um, but the main thing here is like, don't just like go on TikTok and like throw something together. Like, have some thought on like, what's the movement I'm doing? Why would it help me for the race that I'm gonna do or the sport that I do? So primary example, reverse deadlift. Why is that helpful? Well, bike racing, lower back. You ever been riding and your lower back feels like it's like breaking and you're can hardly sit on your bike anymore? Well, there is an RDL, a reverse deadlift. As you strengthen that, you're going to be able to ride longer and in better position. So that's a correlation to exercise benefit. So again, like this is something I work on with athletes, and I have some stock like strength and conditioning programs that in this photo here, this gym I used to work out at in Arizona. It was a professional athletes gym. It was super nice, and you always had people watching you do stuff, your form. But ultimately, they built all these strength and conditioning programs for bike racing, triathlon, running, and ultimately, like statistically, we track stuff in terms of injuries and distances and different stuff like that. But when we started this strength and conditioning program, um, it was kind of in the back end of my 5 years versus the first 5 years. I wasn't doing as much, but this showed a noticeable decrease to injuries, like drastically from not just overuse injuries, but there was noticeably difference in terms of you'd crash on your bike, mountain biking, but you're doing this big involved strength and conditioning program, you would be less hurt and you'd come back to training sooner. Reason being is that our muscle is like our armor. Fat, you poke it and it's spongy. Muscle, firm. So again, obviously, as you hit, you have more density, more padding, so to speak. So you break less bones, ideally, and you get less hurt. Um, I don't know if anyone watched the Red Bull Rampage. I personally don't watch it anymore because it just gives me too much stress. Um, but you see some of these athletes and the falls that they take, based on mechanisms in a first responding ambulance component, like those are like major trauma, like in some of these people they get up and walk away or have like minor things. And again, that guy that hucked the double backflip, like that's if that was anyone who just a regular body, not a pro athlete, that person's dead today. The fact that that guy like is living and yes, he doesn't have the use of his legs, but again, it could have been you watch that stuff and you think, how's it not worse? So that's where strength and conditioning plays a component in armoring your body and trying to give you, again, not fatiguing as quick, not having as high of injury if you do say crash. There's all sorts of noticeable things. And in terms of even longevity and health, like the older you get, the harder it is to gain. So you just don't want to lose, if that makes sense. And the more and more research I do in terms of the longevity side of it, um, the more that again, I'm not old per se. I'm 34 now, but I think of 24-year-old me who could just rock to the gym and like do all this stuff, and I could crash and I'd feel okay. 34, it's starting to show up a bit more. I had a spill skiing the other day, and like I've got whiplash in my neck, and I don't remember ever having that before. So, you know, you're better to keep it than lose it. So that's the thing, resources are a big component, like trusted resources. Go to someone who does strength and conditioning or has done it and ask for help. And of course, again, like you can reach out and happy to brainstorm ideas. But again, a lot of this is to implore you to take information and add it into your training. So that puts us at, 15 minutes to go. This in terms of hopefully it gives you something in terms of, we kind of touched on a lot of topics, but I think all these topics really are for right now, because ultimately why I don't want to have this lunch and learn closer to racing is because by that point it's like you should have been doing, all that mental rehearsing and you should have already had your goals set per se. But yeah, I want to leave it to questions, if anyone has any. And then ultimately, too, I can kind of forecast a bit like some of the other topics that we'll have in the lunch and learns. I'm still coordinating it, but by far the two most popular lunch and learns that I do are nutrition, and there's another one kind of on the do's and don'ts of racing. Those have always seemed to be the two really popular ones. I'm still working on availability of the nutritionist that I have, Sierra, who for the last few years has been a part of kind of the company and takes on clients. So I'm waiting for her to get back to me on what dates she would like to do. So we talk about there's kind of two sessions with her, one on just general nutrition and eating, and then race specific. So once I have those dates, of course I'll share them. But you see, like when you registered for this one, there's a lot more until June, first Tuesday of the month until June. So register for more of them, and yeah, if anyone has any questions, let me know. And again, it doesn't have to be on this topic. Like I look at it as you got 15 minutes with me. Ask away anything that comes to your mind.
Um,
Yeah, go ahead, Scott.
Yeah, he doesn't want to interrupt any so conversations. As you know, I don't have a gym. I have a home gym. So
Yeah.
the reverse deadlifts, have you ever seen a way of doing them with dumbbells?
Oh, totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
Basically all that you're doing is just lowering the weight down while pushing your butt back. So yeah, some people will use a barbell. That's usually how I do my reverse deadlifts is with a barbell, but totally you could do it with kettlebell, you could do it with dumbbells. Like as long as you got something that you kind of holding and you're lowering it down to the ground and kind of coming back up, that's fantastic. So that works. Anybody else? Any other questions, thoughts? Put it in the chat as well if you like. Make sure I didn't miss any while we were chatting. Well, a lot of cool races. Oh, we got someone doing Billy doing Unbound 100. That'll be a big day. Nice. Uh, cool. Well, in that case, we can wrap this one up. Oh, one in the chat here. Stretching, how often? Yeah. Good one. I'd say the older I get, the more I stretch, which is kind of a laugh. But yeah, it's funny. If you asked me that like probably 10 years ago, yeah, I hardly did the stretching that was required. I was also fortunate that I seemed to like never get injured that often. But um, as I've taken a more polished approach, and especially in my pro racing side of things, like stretching was an everyday activity for me. Even now, like I just get up in the morning and I'll do some stretches, take the dog out for a walk, followed by a few more stretches. I know a lot of times now before I run, I kind of have to stretch. Um, I will say I still don't really stretch much before the bike, but I definitely stretch after. Whereas running, like I have to stretch before I run, or I'm gonna like do something to myself, it seems now. But bike, I still don't stretch before it a ton. Not saying that's right, but I always stretch after. So again, I'm definitely pro running, stretching into your daily routine. And again, you don't need to make some like marathon hour stretch session every day, like 15 minutes. You think of that like compounding, adding up throughout like and even speaking to like this kind of strength and conditioning thing, like even if like you don't have a gym and maybe you're already tight on time and you're like I really just need to ride my bike, I don't really have time for it, like doing some just simple stuff at home that takes 10-15 minutes, like some push-ups, some sit-ups or dead bug or some core exercise mixed with like a squat or two, like these are things that don't take a ton of time. And sometimes we get caught into like, oh, well, it's only 10 or 15 minutes, so it's not worth my time. Don't underestimate compounding things. When they become habitual, they definitely add up and they become a noticeable difference. And I'll say that with stretching as well. I've definitely noticed that when I go through good stretches of being on it, like just routine based every day, having a stretch, I feel better, not just athletically, but in my personal life. And again, back to the de-stressing component too. Like if stretch, like that can be mindfulness all in itself. So like that's a double dose there. So great question and agreed. Stretch away. Any other questions? Sweet. Well, I will stop the recording.